So I have just had Ash James in from the CSP, and we talked about a real wide-ranging set of topics, from AI to the NHS 10-year plan. The big talking point was around the job roles that are available at the moment. So I think there's only 20 listed currently in the NHS, and when you've got 3,000 or 4,000 students coming through, how you deal with that. So really interesting topics. Ash is great, he's really enthusiastic. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what you think. We still want to really drive things forward, and inspiring growth is what I'm all about within PhysiQuip. So let us know what you think. See you soon. Ash, thank you for coming to visit us. So why are you in Manchester today? What have you been doing?
So this morning, actually, I was giving a speech at this year's Health Sciences graduation ceremony, so that was good. Not something I've done before. It was nice to be asked back. I don't know who stitched me up, but one of my old lecturers must have. But yeah, it's nice to be back in Manchester. I do love it as a city.
So, what's it like for you when you're going back in to speak to these new people? Can you relate to that time when you were graduating, and what was next for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, especially now in the current times we're in, I'm sure we'll come on to talk about new graduates and jobs and stuff, but when I graduated back in 2009, there weren't really any NHS jobs, and I really struggled to get one. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Obviously, I did physiotherapy. I knew I wanted to be a physiotherapist. I'd had some great placements with some great people. I had a rough idea, thought I might like to work on intensive care. Pediatrics I quite like the idea of. I didn't do any of that. So when I graduated, the job market was very difficult. So I do really relate to how the graduates are feeling now, actually, more than I have done. And I remember that feeling, being there, sitting there waiting to get your certificate, feeling really proud, and there's a huge sense of accomplishment in it, and they should be proud. So it was really nice to go back and see them there and deliver a speech that hopefully will help, kick them on a little bit. But yeah, it was good.
Yeah, I think it's really good to hear it. I'm a massive optimist, and I really believe in positivity. I really love the industry and the profession. And so what was that the main thing? You talked about saying being proud and so on, but what were you trying to get through to these? Because it wasn't just physio, was it? It was to the whole...
Yeah, there was I think acute medicine there, dietetics, speech and language therapy, occupational safety. I was really just trying to get across that doing a degree in health now in particular, we have an aging population, getting more and more complex, more and more comorbidity. We want to keep people at work. We've got increasing levels of health inequality in the country. We need the graduates now more than ever. There aren't enough physios out there, and we need more. So the message was really of, you've done some hard work, get ready for a bit more. The country needs you. Healthcare needs you to be able to step up and deliver. They've gathered some great skills. They've learned some great or generated some great knowledge, and now they need to use it in a really meaningful way. So I'm sure they will. But it was great to see. It was great to spend some time with them and speak to some of them after. And yeah, it was great.
And in the Bridgewater Hall, which is a great venue for it, quite spectacular.
Yeah, really good venue. Quite intimidating when you go in there. There's 2,500 people stood in front of you, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was good. It was only 4 minutes, so No.
You've got to get a lot of stuff through in that one. And then you touched on that point around the physios coming out. There's loads of stuff online, social media, talking about jobs. Saw an article from Katie Napton talking about that. And as someone that went in straight into private practice like you did, where do you see the landscape of it?
So I think it is difficult out there for graduates at the moment. We ran a search at the CSP a couple of weeks ago before an article came out in the Telegraph. I think there was less than 20 jobs for Band 5s on the NHS Jobs website. And there's obviously about 3,000, 4,000 physios graduating this year. So that is an issue, absolutely. We know that there are ICB cuts, 50%, NHS is merging with Department for Health, NHS 10-year plan, which I'm sure we'll touch on. There's lots of flux in the healthcare system at the moment, and that's being reflected in job opportunities. Now, that I don't think that will last. It won't last. We can't afford for it to last. We need the workforce. But what was it like for me? It was quite a worrying time, but physiotherapy was and remains a brilliant degree in that it's really broad. you've got the opportunity to work in private practice, independent organisations, the MOD, sport. There's so many areas you can work outside of the NHS. The NHS is fundamental to this society and to the country, and I firmly believe that. But as a physiotherapist, you do have the opportunity to work in lots of other places as well. So it's a brilliant degree, and I'm really confident that graduates will be able to utilise their skills in some way if they don't get an NHS job. At the CSP, we're launching our career framework later on this year, and that will outline for new graduates lots of different places that they can work and give them some insight in how people got there. But for me, it was a bit intimidating. It wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do, but I found myself a really great mentor. I worked it, and then I got into rugby relatively quickly. So I've got a rugby background, sports background. And I started working for the North Wales rugby team at the time. Great support system there from the Welsh Rugby Union. And then eventually I went on to be the head physio for Wales Sevens after about 5 years of graduating, something like that, which was a fantastic opportunity, and that team there at the Welsh Rugby Union, headed by Prav, are fantastic. That they are, I truly believe, one of the best in the world. So that to be in that environment, around those learning was incredible. So I feel like there was a bit of a luck involved, but I was in rugby. So what I would say to new graduates is use the levers that you've got. If you know someone that knows someone, or you've been in an industry, or you've been somewhere, use the people that you've got. But it's not the be all and end all. I did go straight into private practice. I was okay. I got, there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. There's loads of brilliant private practitioners out there now who want to take on new graduates and develop people and to bring people on. So, that is the beauty of physiotherapy.
And I think you mentioned some really interesting points. For one, I think the Welsh rugby guys are really impressive in terms of the way that they do things. In terms of private, we work with a lot of practices now. It's a really thriving industry in the private sector, like Carter and George. You see what they're doing, Pure Physio, Pure Sports Medicine, to name just a few there. And certainly with Rhys Carter, he is so pro supporting graduates, getting them in there, and they really commit to education and supporting them, because he's a relatively young guy himself, as is his team. So how do you see the CSP integrating with institutions like that and other ones? Because it's not just them, there's a number of people that are talking like that.
Well, I think the CSP has moved away over the years, and this is way before my time. We used to talk about NHS rotations being the kind of fundamental thing that people did and do. We've moved away from that because we know people's careers look really different, and some people might come out and not go into the NHS. They might specialise early in MSK or another area in the private sector, and that's absolutely okay. I mean, we've talked before about not being absolutist. There is no right way. There's no absolute right way to do something. There's multiple different career routes and multiple different ways you can progress through your career in physiotherapy. So, the way I see us interacting with any of those private providers is the same as we would interact with the NHS. We see them as a fundamental part of how healthcare is delivered in this country, and everybody will need physiotherapy at some point in their life, probably, and certainly into the future. So we want people to be able to access high quality, high value physiotherapy in a way that is useful for them. For some, that will need to be via the NHS. For some, that will be private practice. For some, that will be via independent providers or an insurance model. And we need to make sure that every part of physiotherapy is functioning well and at a high quality. And that's something that I'm really committed to, and that we absolutely need to champion and deliver as a CSP.
Yeah, some good points there. And in terms of linking in with some of the organisations like KT and those, how can that be done better, or how can it be worked upon? Because it's still, again, I've seen in the last 5 years, things are changing so quickly. With where we're spending our time, the vast majority is in the private sector now. So how do we, and I put us in that, you in that, everyone, how do we help move that bit forward?
Yeah, I think the answer is, and certainly my preference is, we need to talk, which we do. I talk to lots of people. I definitely talk to Katie at Physio First and lots of other organisations, and I think that communication is really, really important. Trying to understand each other, understand each other's vantage points, where people are coming from, understand what each person is trying to achieve and what we're all trying to achieve is really, really important. And if you don't have that understanding or that communication, that's when assumptions can be made, that's when things get kind of lost in translation a little bit. So having that open communication for me is absolutely key. And I think that's the way we move forward. And that would be the same in any industry, in any, you know, we've got a bit of a fragmented industry between the NHS, private practice. It's not linked up all that well. And I think we need to do better there. You know, the CSP, again, before I was there, brought out some great guidance on concurrent treatment, because we were seeing people that were getting treated in the NHS, treated privately, and neither in either party sure whether they could or should carry on treating the same patient. Or so there's very clear guidance on that now about how we can link up concurrently. And that's where the role the CSP can play, is to just unconfuse. That's definitely not a term.
I like it.
Yeah, it is how we can get rid of some confusion in those areas.
Yeah, because I think it's really difficult as well, because it's easy to throw mud at things and say what's going wrong on something. But I'm always optimistic, and you can see there is so much demand, and we see so much growth in that private sector. And it's like, well, how can we all work together on it? And like we were talking about the NHS 10-year plan. So can you just go over some of the key parts of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some good things in it from a physiotherapy perspective. So it is mentioned, physiotherapy overtly is mentioned a few times in it, as are allied health professionals. The big key policy position from our perspective is that rehabilitation is talked about very specifically, which is fantastic from our point of view. Some great work done by CSP colleagues there to make sure that rehabilitation is very clearly in the plan. There's great things in there about personalised health budgets, so people being able to have their own money to spend on the care that is suitable for them. The big main points of the 10-year plan are, as I'm sure many have heard, are about the 3 left shifts. So that move from hospital to community, from reactive medicine to prevention, and from analog to digital. So that move to use technology more. So they're the kind of big headlines broadly. Physiotherapy is in there, rehabilitation is in there, which is fantastic. So it's overtly mentioned. So we're going to need physiotherapists to work well in the NHS and with the NHS. As has been mentioned, you know, what the 10-year plan doesn't do, that overtly is talk about how the NHS and independent sectors link together that well. That's not overtly in there. And I'm sure there are 25 other points that I can't remember that are also in there that are probably worth mentioning. But they're the kind of broad strokes. And certainly a move to managing services more locally rather than national directives. So the devolved power to local systems to be able to deliver what they need for their population.
In terms of tech then, do you have any idea what that may look like from tech perspective of how it's being used?
So I think obviously AI is the big buzzword at the moment. AI is talked about an awful lot. We see some brilliant examples of that in physiotherapy. And I think the thing about AI is we often think AI, ChatGPT, is the first thing that comes to people's minds. But AI is so broad. There's so many things in AI. You know, there's Finn's doing some great work at Flock about how they deliver some therapy services, physiotherapy services, utilising AI really well in a number of NHS providers. We've got AI systems that help note-taking. I was on a call with a colleague in Australia who's implementing that really, really well down in Australia in terms of the supplementing the notes and how that's helping clinicians create efficiency, increase productivity. So there are a number of ways in which we can use it as physiotherapists, but more broadly in health. And it's here, it's happening, it's going to happen. So from an AI perspective, the CSP launched our AI principles recently, which are 16 principles that are, some are generic, that can be applied to almost any technology actually, but the rest are relatively specific to AI, about physiotherapy, about AI in practice, education, as a trade union, all of the key principles. So if you were to think, in my service or my practice, I want to implement or use this AI product, you could go to the guidelines, use them as a bit of a checklist, right? Is it transparent to patients? Is the right data protection in place? Is it clinically effective? Can I find that evidence? Is it there? So you can kind of go through a checklist before you implement anything to gauge whether it's an ethical, good use of AI. But a lot of it is more simple than that. I think we ran a digital competence survey, or I wasn't involved. Chris Tack did it back in 2019, if I'm right, and it was still showing then that 20% of physios are still writing notes on paper. So some places are a far cry away from implementing these these kind of AI technologies, and actually the NHS in particular, they're all on different systems. Systems don't talk to each other, so it's all about how the systems can integrate with each other well. And I know there's talk of, any new procurement that's done, there has to be API integration embedded within it, so they're kind of trying to future-proof any technological input. So I think we're trying to future-proof ourselves, but it needs to be more integrated, particularly so that it's a smoother journey for the patient, if you like. And I know in the 10-year plan for England, the big thing was the app. They want to centre a lot of things around the NHS app as a hub for people to book appointments, get information, know what's coming next, have their test results. And for that, you're going to have a big push on technology.
Yeah, it's a massive thing, isn't it? When you're talking about those different systems, we speak to so many different trusts, and they've got different procurement systems, all sorts, and it feels like it's a real nightmare in terms of managing that. So how optimistic are you in terms of getting something that's going to work in the first instance and be able to help with this stuff? Because it is a massive opportunity.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity, and one that I think we have to take. The government, when they're talking about it, seem like they mean business. They seem like they really want to do it. And that's not that people in the past haven't, but I'm sure there are reasons for why it hasn't worked. There's lots of extraneous factors, but it feels like there's a real push for it and a realistic push for it. That digital competence survey that was ran in 2019 is actually being rerun now. So we're going to get an insight into where physiotherapists and other healthcare professionals, because it's not just for physios, for other AHPs as well, have moved in that time. So are we more digitally competent? One of the big things we want to do at the CSP, which is in our strategy, is to encourage and make physiotherapists better at understanding health informatics, understand their data, how to utilise it, how to use it, because that's where we're going to get the push from. It needs to be a top-down directive where that's where the money is, but it also needs to be matched by people's competence, their ability, their desire to utilise technology in a meaningful way on the ground as well. So we have to work at it from both angles, I think. And the CSP, we're doing a lot of work on health informatics. We want to try and help members and physios improve their knowledge and competence in that area so that it can translate into their practice.
There's so much stuff that we're just talking about here. How does the CSP, how do you decide what you're prioritising? How do you work on that element of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we go through these strategic cycles. This is going to be a bit governance-y now, sorry. But we go through strategic cycles. We're currently halfway through a 5-year strategy. The strategy is set by CSP Council. So we go through lots of member consultation. So that will start soon for the next strategy, where we start to ask members what the important things to them are, what they think should be in our strategy, what we should spend our time and effort on as the CSP. That gets refined over time. What are the big risks in the profession? What are the big opportunities in the profession? How are we performing as an organisation? And that will get refined over time to where we come up with a new strategy that will guide us over the 5 years. And it's CSP Council that set and sign off that strategy. Can be difficult. Like you say, physio is really broad, and if you're a member and sometimes you don't see yourself reflected in that strategy, it can feel a bit difficult. But we can't do absolutely everything that's out there. We're as an organisation, sometimes, well, actually, I don't know. I speak to some members and they think there's 1,000 people at the CSP. Some members who think there's about 4, and it's somewhere in between. So the organisation is about 170 people, most of which aren't physios. They work in other departments like policy, comms, HR, finance. We obviously have all of those functions as well. So there's probably about 30, 40 physios that work at the CSP. So we balance work between all of those staff to deliver a strategy over a 5-year period that is, there's only so much we can do. And as the CSP, do we want to try and do everything and be relatively ineffective? Because that's really hard to do when you try and affect everything. Or do we concentrate on some big areas and really try and have an impact over those 5 years? And that's where we try and strike the balance between making sure that members know and feel heard when they have problems, but also making sure that we deliver impact for members so that we are able to say that we are useful as an organisation. Rehab in the NHS 10-year plan for England is a brilliant example of that. You know, that took lots of work behind the scenes by lots of people at the CSP who will never be able to talk about the conversations that they've had or be able to mention names or talk about how many hours they spent on it or weekend calls they took. But rehabilitation and physiotherapy are in the NHS 10-year plan, which I firmly believe wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the CSP. So that's the kind of impact and work, and that needs to kick on now. We need to see that realised. We need to see that implemented, which we will absolutely hold NHS England or Department of Health to account for. Now it's in the plan. But they're the types of things that we try and do, and it's managing impact and performance of the organisation versus, you know, the mitigation of risk that's out there for us as a professional group, whether that's reputationally, financially as an organisation. And taking the opportunities that are there, things like AI, moving to the community, managing complex care. You know, so we have to balance all of those things. So no, it's not easy.
It's not, because it's a big, that's a decent sized organisation. Yeah. I mean, AI is moving on a, you know, hourly, it's changing all the time on it, to trying to keep up with it. And then you say it is a vast profession. Like some of the other things that we've seen out there, everyone is very proud to be a physio, roughly in terms of that. Everyone's really proud of that. And almost with that becomes a sense of frustration maybe in terms of things that they're not getting right, not being valued. Mm-hmm. So where would you say the profession sits in terms of value within the grand scheme of things? Because the reason I ask that is around private medical insurance, which is always been a massive bone of contention. You see loads more stuff on social media. So where do you see the respect, I guess, of the physio profession sitting?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So when we speak to decision makers and people in NHS England, government officials, members of parliament, all know what physio is for a start, which is great, and all respect and absolutely see the value in what physiotherapy does. When we asked the public, so the last time we really asked the public was part of our Stronger My Way campaign, which was just before COVID, I think. The public generally value physiotherapy as much as they do a doctor when they're talking about musculoskeletal health. So physiotherapy value to the public is really high. Physiotherapy value to decision makers is generally high. We're in a really crowded market, if you like, where doctors and nurses are always talked about. It's always the first mention. You know, we talked about the NHS 10-year plan, and it's amazing that physiotherapy is in there, rehabilitation is in there. It's dominated by medic and nurse narrative in there, which is okay, but that's the space we occupy. That's why there's power in the allied health professional group sometimes. When we work as AHPs, we are the third largest workforce across the country. So doctors, nurses and AHPs. But as individuals, we can sometimes get drowned out. So we're occupying a very crowded space in terms of value, in terms of advocating for our value. We have lots of evidence to demonstrate our value, which is good. So physiotherapy as an AHP group, generally good at generating research, but we could do better. So I think that's an absolute priority for us going forward, particularly with the advent of AI. You know, AI is, for me, you know, the same as a systematic review. If you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. So you've got to put good research, good data, good information in about physiotherapy to be able to have good information at the other end when AI is utilising it. So we have to keep on our foot on the pedal on research within the physiotherapy community and deliver what the impact is of our profession, which I firmly believe is a strong one. So I think perceptually we have good value. I think evidence-wise it's okay, we could do better. The PMI point is a very specific one, I think, in that if I'm really honest, we don't help ourselves. So we're a trade union as well as a professional body at the CSP. And because we're a trade union, competition law prevents us from advocating for one pay for that sector in the same way that we do for the NHS. We have collective bargaining for the NHS. We can do that because we're a trade union. We can't do that because of competition law in the private medical insurance space. So we have to demonstrate the value of physiotherapy, but what happens is, or what I've seen happen, and being in this space, I've seen it myself, is you get physios that do accept low rates. You get physios that do accept whatever the private medical insurance is offering. They're a commercial organisation as a private medical insurer. If people are taking it, they're going to keep giving it. And it's very hard to drive the value up of physiotherapy in that space unless everyone goes together. And it's a really fragmented sector. There's no one body that looks after the whole sector to be able to move it in one direction at the same time. So that's really difficult. So I think we sometimes create a bit of a race to the bottom ourselves, and us digging our heels in and not accepting rates that PMIs offer is what we need to do collectively, but that's really difficult to affect en masse.
Yeah, I think that's a really relevant point, and one that we have a lot with the clients that I go and see. We'll be talking about whether they see insurance patients or cash pay clients, and I think that's another fundamental. I'm going off on a slight tangent on this now, is like with sales and that. So fundamentally, I'm seen as a salesperson, which you can look at that and think, right, is that really the case? But all these businesses are private businesses. In the private sector, so they're selling a product that they're doing. However, when I'm in that, the facial expression when I talk about selling something, even with really established, charging a lot of money, they don't really accept that they're selling something. And I think it's a major shift that needs to be looked at as a profession, because there's huge opportunities, and I believe that's bringing down the value of physio, that they don't want to charge more, they feel bad for charging more. Now it's all got to be done ethically and with care and conviction and understanding of it. But what's your perspective of what I've just said there, and how can we do it? Because again, I think, sorry to carry on here as well, but it's like also you've got competition between each of these practices, whereas if we could look at a more collaborative approach, whatever that may be, everything would go up. Like physios are sold out. Like the private clinics that we're working with, they're busy because they're delivering good service. Yeah. So how do we push the whole bit forward? That's really what drives me, is that how do we help these people become more comfortable with accepting that they need to run a profitable and value-added business?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Physiotherapy is a values-based profession. People get into it generally because they want to help people. They don't always get into it because they think they're going to sell services at the end of it. So I totally agree. Sometimes it's a bit of an alien thought process. Money's a bit of a dirty word in physiotherapy, because fundamentally the reason people do it is for patients and is for people who need help. So it is a mindset that needs shifting. We are seeing an increasing amount of physiotherapists go into private practice straight away. We're seeing that growth of entrepreneurial mindset that we don't always necessarily or haven't historically seen in physiotherapy. So I think that is growing. I mean, there's other professions that build in that kind of entrepreneurial business side of things to undergraduate courses, for example, so that gives them that grounding early. I don't think that's necessarily the right thing for physiotherapy. I mean, curricula are absolutely packed at the moment. So even me saying that out loud now, I'm sure there's some lecturers and educationalists out there who've made a gasp if they're listening. Don't worry, I'm not advocating for that. But I think it's something that it's a skill that you need to develop. And I do think if that's what you're interested in, it is not something, I mean, people do learn as they go, obviously, but I think it's probably something that needs some concentrated learning and practice compared to other skills that we might develop over time, because it is so alien to us as a profession. So I agree with you. I think it needs concentrated effort. I don't necessarily think it needs to go into undergraduate degrees as other professional bodies do, or other professional groups do. But I do think it's something that needs specifically working on, if that's the path that you're going to take, in the same way that you would work on a specific skill if you went into a different area of physio.
Yeah, I mean, it's something which maybe you and I can pick up, because I'm really passionate about how we help people, because all it is professional development and different things. I think there's skills that are beneficial in a number of areas, so I think that'd be a good topic. And then another thing that I see, again, I'm in 10 practices every week, or sports teams, hospitals, whatever it is, and I've just started a new initiative with a couple of physio friends, Andy Hosgood and Andrew McCauley, and it's the Unbound Project, which is all around getting people together, getting them out of their environment and making them feel less disconnected. Because I think with a lot of these clinics, teams, you do become quite siloed.
Yeah.
For one, you may be working on your own in a room for a lot of the day, and a lot of the companies are doing more stuff to bring people together. But like, how do you see it from from that clinician perspective of just giving them support, not just about clinical support, but just for their own growth, development of things? Because I really believe in that, and I'm part of a group that I go and I'm a part of every month, and it really helps me get out of my day to day and thinking bigger picture with all of these things that we're talking about.
Yeah. So humans are social animals. We like to be around other people. I think this is not just an issue in private practice, but if we're thinking about clinicians and the way that care is going in the community, working in the community, if you're in the NHS, can be quite isolating as well. So in both sectors, I don't think it's helpful that people spend a lot of time on their own. One, for their own mental health. Two, for their own development, because you learn from others in a way, and three, socially. It's really important that you're having that ability to offload about work or friends or whatever that might be, and having that group and that community around you is really, really important. So, I think we should be collaborating with each other. And back to your other point about these organisations are competing against each other, something that historically physios don't like doing either. So I think if we give people a nudge towards collaboration, most of the time people will snap your hand off to do it, because that's the way that we are inclined. So I think creating these groups is absolutely fantastic. The CSP has professional networks. We have some communities of practice that you can join in the same way that sounds like it's providing support. So being part of a community is really, really important, because it creates that sense of belonging, generates that bond between people, and at a more fundamental level will help you develop. It'll help you stay in touch with your CPD. It'll help you develop that next skill that you feel like you need, or take you on a career path that you didn't think you were going to go. So I think there's so many reasons why it's fundamental.
Yeah, no, I agree. And with that in mind, as well, as we do a lot of work with sports therapists, sports rehabbers, podiatrists, how do you see that collective nature? Because you mentioned about rehab and how do you see all those fitting together?
From a physiotherapy point of view, we've collaborated forever. MDT working is not new to physiotherapy, and we have a campaign, or had a campaign that ran, called Collaborate, Don't Compete, specifically aimed at exercise professionals and others who are working in the same space. There's plenty of room for everybody. One of the great things I learned when I was at the Welsh Rugby Union was the integration between strength and conditioning coaches, physiotherapy, psychology. How do all of those groups work together? There's plenty of patients, there's plenty of people that need help, and how we work with each other and understand each other's professional value is really fundamental to the care of people. So I think it's absolutely paramount we collaborate. We need to understand each other's roles, and we should be championing each other. It's really important that we understand the value of each of those professions and how they work together. So it can be done. It's being done in some really great, in some places that I worked before. So I worked at Connect Health, who are not called Connect Health anymore because they've just merged. They just merged with HealthShare. So I worked there. We did some great work with sports rehabbers, sports therapists and physios working together, particularly on a graduate development program. So it can be done, and I firmly believe there are enough people out there that need help that means we can work together really meaningfully.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love hearing you talk, and you're so passionate about it, and I think it is good for people to see you being so optimistic and talking about it. So where do you see, you've come from a really diverse background, you've seen a lot of institutions, like you mentioned Connect there, so how optimistic are you about the future, and where else, what else haven't we talked about that is worth mentioning?
No, I think it's a good point. I'm a bit like you. I'm an eternal optimist. I have to kind of make sure that I don't suffer from optimism bias too much, which I do. I tend to always think, everything will work out in the end. So I try and be a little bit more analytical and a little bit more careful than just my natural disposition, but I am generally optimistic. If I go back to the graduate situation, I was the same in 2008, 2009, and everything was okay. I firmly believe if we can keep these graduates engaged, if we can keep them engaged in the profession they've come from, make sure they maintain their skills, they can utilise them across a broad spectrum of physiotherapy, they will be okay. People will find a way through their career that contributes to society really meaningfully, just as I have and other people have in my situation. So I am optimistic. I think there's issues with our visibility. You know, we talked about doctors and nurses and where we sit in the kind of healthcare landscape and hierarchy. So I think we need to do more and more to talk about our value and demonstrate our value as physiotherapists. You know, what is that? I think we do it well. I think we can do it better. And I think it's really important that we do collaborate across other professions and really try and develop a system that is beneficial for patients, and that's the most important thing for me. You know, as I've said multiple times in this conversation, patients are becoming more complex, more comorbid, aging in population, rising health inequality. That massively concerns me. You know, so I think there's some of the problems that we're facing, and I think, as optimistic as I am, if we don't get the right care in the right places for people, it's not going to go well. You know, and I'm less optimistic. So I think if we can implement in England, and remember I've just talked about England here in the NHS long-term plan, there are plans in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, you know, across all, the CSP represents all 4 nations, and there are great things going on in all of those countries, as well as similar issues around graduate jobs, etc. So this is a UK problem, it's not just an England problem. So there are things that we need to solve, there are things that we need to work on. I think it's going to be a tricky 12 to 18 months. But I think once the plans start to be implemented, I think things will settle down. I think jobs will open up again. And I think we'll be in a better position in 12 to 18 months' time. So I'm optimistic that things will be okay. I think technology will help. And I think we're on the right track, but there is more we can do.
Brilliant. So what would your advice be for those people, the graduates that are coming through in this year?
I think don't panic. Stay engaged. As I've said, there's plenty of work to go around, plenty of patients that need help. Physiotherapy is a fantastic degree. It's got really broad strokes. You know, you can work in lots of different areas, lots of different sectors. Don't panic, be patient, and everything will be okay.
Great. Well, I believe you. So that sounds good.
Thanks. Good.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks for coming in.
No problem. Thank you.